Welcome, everyone, to Evolution Before Transformation, how procurement will best leverage digital on demand to achieve real change. I'm your moderator or host, if you prefer, Jon Hansen. And in this next hour, we're going to be talking about the evolution of what you can call the SaaS model or SaaS-based solutions in terms of, and I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly, in terms of how you assess where they fit into the landscape, the strategy for implementing it, and obviously where you go in terms of measuring the success. But before we do that, I want to get to our panel and welcome. First of all, Alan Rafiq from Market Dojo. Alan, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. There, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, if you could just give us about a 30-second synopsis of a little bit of your background and what you do.
My background's engineering, procurement at Rolls-Royce, and then I moved to what some people might call the dark side of doing a bit of consultancy. I did a bit of sales before coming around to selling, managed the auctions within a boutique consultancy, and it was there where myself and two other co-founders, we realized there was a different way to do things. So we set up Market Dojo with the view to becoming an easy-to-use, on-demand e-sourcing solution. Since then, over the last 9 years, we've grown the team to 21 people. We've got an enterprise solution, and hopefully we've got happy customers and a happy team as well.
Well, it's interesting. You came from the practitioner side to the provider side in the middle with the consulting. So you certainly get a good idea from the overall end-to-end, if I could use that term, of the process itself. So welcome. I next would like to, I don't know how I got up here, but you know what? We can talk about me later. Let's bring on our next guest, Colm Colbert. Colm, you're with Paddy Power Betfair. Could you give us a little bit of information about yourself? Because again, you're actually utilizing the Market Dojo solution, but the journey that you took there was quite interesting. So if you could just give us a little bit of background on your area of expertise.
Sure, thanks, John. Very, very happy to be here today. Thank you. My background is as a chartered accountant, and for many years I worked in the shared services center in Europe for Baxter Healthcare, an American pharma company. I joined Paddy Power Betfair, which is a betting and gaming company, in 2013, a very different industry. And it was in 2017 that I made a move into the procurement area. As part of that, within my brief, I was asked to design a system strategy for procurement that would help the procurement team, which was quite immature at the time. We had just had a merger of Paddy Power and Betfair, so it was an immature sort of combined team. But I was asked to devise a system strategy that would help that team to achieve procurement excellence. And it's really on the basis of my experience there that I want to talk to you today.
Perfect. Well, and this is emphasizing with what I did with Ellen, of course, you coming from the practitioner side. I think what's important is you've got to walk a mile in somebody's shoes, as they say. So those who are joining us, obviously, who are practitioners themselves on the procurement side, you're able to sort of relate to, and they'll be able to relate to you as to what the journey is about. I guess that'd be a safe bet, right, Colm?
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to share the experience.
All right. And finally, Andre Lallier. Welcome, Andre. And again, if you could just give a little bit of background, because I think you have an interesting perspective here, being in that lead up to a SaaS adoption. But if you could give us a little bit of your background.
Hi, John. Great to be here. My corporate background is telecoms, 30 years or so in a very large telecoms company, where I built, led, and transformed commercial functions, both sales and procurement, at a fairly large scale. I guess we're talking, 1 billion up sort of scale. Since then, like Alan, I also went over to the dark side, and so I'm running a consultancy company right now, so in the dark side, as it were.
All right. Sorry to interrupt, because Alan used that same term. Is it safe to say, because you've come from the practitioner side, the dark side is now the enlightened side?
Yeah, maybe. And so, so my company is called Insight to Income, and within that we help clients with transformation programs in the procurement space mainly. And as well as consulting, though, we're also working on developing and launching a really cool online tool, which is all about taking the heavy lifting out of the change management aspect of these sort of programs. But more about that maybe on a later webinar.
Absolutely. I'd look forward to hearing that as well. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And I want to remind everyone to get a few housekeeping chores out of the way. First of all, to begin, we're going to be running a series of polls. This is going to be an interactive experience, by the way. So if you have questions, please avail yourself to either the chat or the questions option on your screen. Also, with the polls, we're going to be having 3 of them and sharing them online after the webinar on Twitter with the hashtag SaaSDojo. Now, if you can, I would certainly recommend that you join the conversation there, because there'll be many industry experts and thought leaders who usually do join afterwards, and it'll certainly give you a chance to maybe ask some additional questions, make some additional connections, which I think are going to be very, very important. So those are the things that I want to make available to you. And again, this entire webinar is being recorded, so it will be available on on-demand basis. Now, let's look at the schedule, and very quickly, and then I want to get right into it because time does pass quickly. We're going to break down 3 areas: assessing your current procurement practice to determine which is the best point of entry for a SaaS solution, because there are ways in which, and we'll get into it, as to how you approach this to get the most mileage out of it. And I know Colin will have some interesting insights on what he refers to as being a mature practice. How do you develop that longer term integration strategy? And when you implement it, how do you measure the success of that implementation? How do you quantify it? And of course, and as Andre mentioned, what's involved in change management. So this is what you can expect that we will be covering today. So let's start off with assessment. I'm going to start right at the gate with a poll. Poll number 1, when looking to implement e-procurement technology, which area of your procurement practice should you assess first? Toby, I'll turn it over to you to make the poll live. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with you first, Colin. Then I'll go to you, Ellen, and then I'll go to you, Andre. What do you think? What do you think the answers are going to be here, Colin? What do you expect to see?
Okay. I mean, look, it's hard for me to know, I suppose, what other people are thinking. But again, from my own experience and what I've learned along my journey, I certainly wouldn't be starting with systems. I think some people make the mistake of buying systems for immature process or where there is no process, hoping that the new system will give them a process, and it rarely does, and it often ends up being money wasted. So I think people will be going for policy or process. And personally, am I allowed to give my own perspective or my own vote?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Sure. For me, I will start at the highest level, the most strategic level, which for me is policy. For me, it's a bit like a very well-developed mission statement about what what procurement wants to do, around spend governance, sustainability, spend risk, etc., and so on. From that, I believe process then follows as something more tactical and more sort of detailed or whatever, and thereafter system comes in, if you like, to help implement that process and reinforce it.
Well, that's an interesting thing, and Ellen, I'll go to you, and then Andre, tie into you as well, because we'll segue from you, Andre, into the first slide. But Ellen, your background as a practitioner, obviously, when you look at the old days of technology, it was believed that you put technology, and technology would make process better. Obviously, you look at it as in a much different realm. Like, what are your thoughts about responses to this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Although I must say I'd probably agree with Colin there. I'd love to say systems since we're a tech company, but I mean, I'm a huge process fan, because process, if you get the process right, allows scalability. And I love doing gap analysis. You're mapping out your current process, looking at your future process, what you want, and how to get from A to B. And I think Colin's got a point that I think it's probably a mixture of starting with a bit of policy on what you want to do, mapping out where you want the processes to look like, how to get from A to B, and then refining the policy back around that, and then looking for the system side to fit into that side. So yeah.
All right. So now here's, and Toby, should we close off the poll now, do you think? Yes. I guess we should. Can we post the results, Toby, or should I just read them? I can read them. Toby, by the way, is the man behind pulling the levers that makes this work seamlessly. So the response, and Andre, I'm going to move to this momentarily, to this next slide right now, as I asked you to look at the response. The response is 31% said policy was the most important thing to focus on. 56% said process, and 13% said system. So, Andre, having the advantage of what the audience said, and looking at this first screen where you were talking about, maybe elaborate a little bit of the benefits of new technologies is a problem with taking small incremental process, and it's not going to be sufficient. Can you tie in these responses to this article that you've written, which I thought was very insightful?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy to see the result coming out on process, because for sure it's the way you do things which is the start for any transformation journey or improvement journey in a company, right?
Right.
And I think when I talked about small incremental process improvements are not going to be sufficient. It's really, to put it in different words and clear the air, it's all about thinking to do the things the way you did it before, but just do them a little bit better is not going to work for me. It's not what technology is offering right now. It's not what's going to be sufficient to get ahead of your competitors. The first step when you look at assessing an organization and a process and operation, apart from understanding what you've got, though, is then questioning the way you do things and saying, should we be doing something differently? Not can we do it better, but can we do it differently? Okay, and that's what I mean by incremental steps not being good enough. Now, that can be done on all sorts of levels. For sure, the first time we introduced the auction many years ago into our procurement operations, it was really seen as a way of doing things differently.
All right. Well, wait. Now, let me just interject something here, Andre. When I looked at, I just posted to the audience for those who voted for policy. And remember, I don't know if we don't want to say if somebody chose other than process, it's the wrong answer. More interestingly enough, I posed in the chat to everyone, for those who voted policy, why policy before process? So if we look at this, why would policy before process? Why do you think that would be? And you know what, Andre, I'll come back to you momentarily, but Colin, why do you think that would happen?
Yeah, I'll give you a very good example. Again, we were an immature procurement function. We were not putting too much emphasis on sustainability around procurement and checking for things like modern slavery and ethical and legal behavior in the supply chain. Our biggest concern around supplier risk was on credit risk and whatever, the going concern of suppliers. We took a decision then as policy that we would look at sustainability. So this became an important topic for us. We put in a very, very general statement on it. And that gave us a statement of intent that then led us to actually investing more heavily in this area. And as it happens, we put in some investment here, and we're now trying to figure out the process whereby we will be able to manage the risk and not to be overloaded with alerts on suppliers that aren't really that relevant. So in this particular case here, the policy definitely came before the process and indeed the system. It was just basically a statement on our behalf that this was something that mattered to us.
Well, and Andre, but I'll go to Ellen first, and then Andre in terms of this. But Ellen, is it safe to say that it's not necessarily a sequential order? It's more or less of a strategic order. Like Colin was mentioning, certain things you've got to obviously focus on the process, and maybe Andre, that's the big picture that you have to look at doing, and obviously managing the change with regards to that. But the policy is strategically one of those processes that has to be considered. I mean, is that a fair comment, Alan? It's not like one is more important than the other. It's more or less of the strategic introduction.
It's really interesting. I mean, tying those all together. I mean, I'd certainly agree with Colin there in terms of there are certainly some policy decisions that need to be made to help define the new process before you do the gap analysis. But I'd also come back around to Andre's point about not doing things better but differently. When I was selling engineering software for a long time, a lot of large aerospace companies had moved away from developing their own fluid dynamic codes to buying off-the-shelf codes. But the only way they can maintain their competitive advantage is how they use those codes within the organization in terms of the process. So, you know, everyone can kind of use e-auctions now, but it's the process that you put around the procurement department on how you go about using these new tools, which gives you the competitive advantage. So it's definitely, and then that will drive new policies, you know, in terms of how things are bought and spend levels, etc. So it's a very much an iterative change about moderating the process to do things differently to gain the competitive advantage.
So realistically speaking, Andre, I'm going to come back to your article because you had written this in May 2019. And by the way, within each of the slides, audience, there are the resources that upon which the slide information is based. I mean, is this the all roads lead to Rome kind of scenario that you were talking about, Andre? I mean, you've got to have big, bold vision of where you have to go, but there are different roads, and usually process is where a great deal of focus should be, but with regards to policy, there may be another element or road in depending on what you want to achieve. I mean, is that where you draw the parallel in your analogy there?
Absolutely. I think sort of to wrap this little element up a little bit, it doesn't much so matter where you're starting from. It's more about knowing where you're going to. Right. So, I mean, procurement operations have a lot of moving parts. Now, you absolutely need a good governance framework, but the good governance framework doesn't drive you bottom line improvements if you have a leak in P2P, right? So if your P2P processes and systems are really watertight, which is fantastic, but you need to load them with good commercial contracts, right? So, but before you can make good commercial contracts, you need a process around your category management. You need to build the interfaces, trustworthy interfaces with your internal stakeholders, and you need good spend data, right? So your spend data systems have to work as well. So what we're
okay, sorry to interrupt.
Here is that a lot of
sorry to interrupt, but Andrew in the audience gave feedback to a question I posed, why policy, and this sort of dovetails in what you're saying, Andre. He mentioned that policy is part of governance leadership, setting what is expected of your procurement team, while process is just how we do it, then systems is what we use to affect the process. And I'll go quickly, Andre, to you, then Colin, and then end with you, Alan, because we want to be able to move through this because we could talk about this all day. I think this is fascinating. What do you think about what Andrew just said, Andre?
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yes, clearly, you can think about a policy as being the direction overall you want to.
All right.
And link this back to what Colin said in the very beginning as well. You know, you need to think through your processes before you start thinking about your systems. But the fact is, most of us in large contexts already have a policy, already have a process, and already have systems, right? So the reality is, if you're working in a large corporate context, is you have to work with all of these all of the time. You don't have the luxury of taking a time out and saying, okay, I'll start with one or I'll start with the other. So you need then to find the most pragmatic approach to moving in the direction that you need to move, but you need to have the big picture of all the moving parts here.
All right, now Colin, and you're very familiar with this, and I mentioned that, and you know, I've said this when we've talked previously, that your process or your methodology that you adopt, and we'll get more into it in the next section. Sure. Your methodology was the maturation process, and this came from one of your presentations on how Paddy Power Betfair really successfully implemented the SaaS solution, the Market Dojo solution. I mean, based upon what Andrew's saying and what you just heard Andre say, I mean, it all sort of fits into what we've got here on the screen, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. And it's interesting, you know, you can't have two without the other one, basically. That something will not succeed or something will break down. This came originally from, you know, we had a new procurement team in 2017 as a result of a merger. My boss then was very keen to achieve, as he called it, Procurement 2.0 or Procurement Excellence. He was very focused on process and policy. And then he said, by the way, Colin, I know I need the systems to get this done as well. That's your job now. And he handed me that sort of blank slate or whatever. By the same token, when I embarked on my journey, and we'll talk more about it in more detail, one of the first lessons I learned then, talking to somebody who had experienced this area, was whenever you do, Colin, don't go buying a system without having the mature process there already. And this person had seen this happening in other organizations and failing. So very, very much, you see, it's kind of there's a cycle to this. And exactly as Andre was saying, these things are all happening together at any given time. I think the big danger is losing sight completely on any one of them or whatever, while focusing on the others.
See, so there's no wrong answer on the poll. Basically, it's a matter of the approach, the strategy for doing this. And Ellen, let's finish it off with you here, hearing all of these things, because I go back to the original introduction. You come from a deep knowledge of the practitioner side, like Colin, like Andre. And so when you are able to structure technology to understand that, you're now getting away from, aren't you, of where the users have to adopt or adapt to the technology. You're now adapting the technology to the users, which is what you did when you started the organization, when you started Market Dojo. Am I right there?
Yeah, I mean, it's adapting the technology to users. I mean, in the software today, I mean, when I was at Rolls-Royce, they had a large ERP implementation brought about through benefits required for senior management, didn't really think about the users, didn't get the adoption, didn't really think about the process being useful to the users. And nowadays, the software that is developed is not bespoke, it's off the shelf. However, I think the term that we use is it can be customized. So even though you buy off the shelf software, it's got a high degree of customization within the software. So you've still got a SaaS multi-tenanted application, which benefits from lots of customers all feeding into developments on the same platform, but it's highly customizable to suit new processes and give organizations the competitive edge over their competitors. I think that's the key thing about the software today, that it can be customized around different processes, but it's one software, so it's not bespokely developed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And one of the things that came to mind before we go on to the next area of actually developing. So you've got the policy process, and you've got technology lined up where we'll help you do that and customize it. One thing I would just add to the conversation, and based on years of experience, and you mentioned it, Ellen, is that you need the involvement of people in procurement. In the past, in the old days, procurement was really on the outside looking in a lot of cases. But what you're talking about now is very much a collaborative effort. Would I be right in saying that? And that's where the policy is formed, and that's where the processes are perfected, and that's ultimately where the technology will best be leveraged to achieve those results. I mean, is that a fair way to sum up this first section, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the policy, processes, and the systems, and when you start nailing that, it will define the person spec and the job spec of the people that you need to satisfy the requirements to enable the procurement department to carry out the plan, as it were.
All right. Well, let's look now at the development. Let's, Toby, cue our second poll. See, I'm thinking of warm weather already. Which area of the procurement practice should be automated first? Spend analytics, pipeline management, e-sourcing, which includes RFX, auctions, supplier engagement, contract management or supplier relationship, and/or ordering and invoicing, or any other. Let's open up the poll now and get your feedback. And what we'll do, I'm going to start with you first, Andre, then go to you, Alan, and then finish with you, Colin. Which one should be first? Is it a matter of which one is the easiest to implement? Like what governs the area of focus?
Yeah, again, right. So again, it all really depends on what, on this one depends a little bit also on the nature of your business. Obviously, if you have a very high level of P2P flow, all right. So if you are handling tens of thousands of orders and invoices, then I would suggest you get that under control pretty quickly. Because if you don't, you will have leakage, you will not know your spend data, and so it'll be very difficult to go to market. So if you're looking at very high transaction volumes, you need to get your transaction part, your P2P part, under control. Doing that is complex because you obviously have to interface your ERP. It can often be quite a big job. Whereas things like e-sourcing can be stood up pretty quickly and easily, even with Market Dojo technology can be stood up basically on demand when you need it. So the sort of entry point for using e-sourcing technology is really very easy. So you can step up and step down.
Okay, sorry to interrupt here, Ajay, because you said something that's interesting, and Alan, I want to get you involved with this because I think this is an important point here. Is that the integration or communication, especially with spend analytics and data, you require good connectivity between the SaaS solution and the ERP. Now, I don't want to date myself, but in the old days, going back to the late 90s, building the bridge between what was called originally a bolt-on solution and the Oracle backend could cost $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, if not more. And I remember once somebody from Oracle saying, "We're not really interested in building that bridge because we don't like getting out of bed in the morning for less than $1 million." And that was a true statement, by the way. And this is going back to the late 90s. But isn't it with SaaS technology? And let's not get into the clean data just at this point. Let's address what Andre said, which I think is important. The connectivity capability, isn't it much easier to connect with ERP solutions with today's SaaS solutions? You don't have that expensive, elongated process of building a bridge?
Well, absolutely. I mean, systems today are designed with open APIs, and they're designed to be connected to each other easily to bring about those integrations. I mean, with our clients, the quick win areas for our clients where they can bring about an immediate ROI, unlike any large ERP implementation, is around a large sourcing exercise or an e-auction or supplier compliance through onboarding with respect to Modern Day Slavery Act or anything like that. A lot of companies already have ordering and invoicing from a very early age generally. If they're going to embark upon a large new exercise, I mean, I might be a bit biased, but the e-sourcing gives you immediate ROI. But normally they'll start with, well, spend analytics and contract management, supplier relationship management will be started, but it's a much, much longer process. There's not really quick wins for that. It takes a while to get things in the right format to enable that to happen.
All right, now wait, there's one thing you said, and I'm going to now get you involved in this, Colin, because the connectivity between a SaaS solution or a cloud-based solution and the ERP is not as complex as it once was. But the quality of the data and clean data, it keeps coming up repeatedly here, is that you need to have the right data and data governance. I mean, how do you get to that point? Because right now what we're seeing in the response is that 50% of those in attendance are putting spend analytics as being the top thing to focus on, and 35% are ordering and invoicing, and then a percentage are going to e-sourcing, RFX, about 14%. So how do you get there? Spend analytics are so important. You can't analyze bad data. What do you do? Like, what did Patty do in regards to that?
Sure. Okay. As it happens, at the point where I came on board with this, we already had a P2P solution in place, so we did have ordering and invoicing. And the first thing that I picked up and looked at was actually spend analytics. So I think it's very hard to get good spend. To get good spend analytics without having effective recording of invoice information or the PO information already, which I think is quite hard to do without a good solid P2P system. Once we had the ordering and invoicing data in place, thereafter it's a question of loading that data, and then if you like, a lot of drafts and phases of cleaning through it, identifying that which is irrelevant. For example, stuff like VAT, etc. In our particular context, we take that out. Trying to find stuff then, for example, that may relate to travel and expenses, employee spend, and so on and so forth. So you got to start off with good data sources. The next phase then is seeing what they look like and cleaning through them yourself and trying to isolate that which is actually meaningful to you. And I would say applying a very, very sensible and reliable procurement taxonomy to it, like categorization that actually makes sense to procurement people.
All right. Well, now here's a couple of things. I want to integrate our audience into the discussion. I'm going to read a couple of things here. Policy is part of governance leadership, setting up what is expected. We got that from Andrew before. Paul writes, Colin was absolutely correct. One of my clients has to select at least one diversity supplier every time they tender. That policy drives the process and thus the functionality of the technology solution. Let me just read a couple more here for you that are coming up. And I want to make sure I get to everyone. A question to the panel, and let's look at this. What are the common barriers to market procurement teams sit around to skirt around the idea of digital transforming? So I'm not quite sure in terms of this AC, what are the common barriers to market procurement teams sitting around to skirt around the idea of digitally transforming? It sounds like to me, and I'll go to you, Andre, first, sounds like to me one of the concerns is how do you get around the barriers of being able to be part of the process? If I'm not right, AC, please correct me on that, but what would you say to that question?
Right, and so here we sort of jumped a little bit to the thing aspect we put towards the end with this question, which is a great question, because in the end of the day, you can have great policy, you can have great processes, you can have great systems, but the people involved in all of this have to work it in the right way that you want, right? So in the end of the day, it all comes down to people and the people aspect and the change management aspect. Now, my experience is that procurement teams are often locked into ways of doing things, right? And don't want to do things in a different way. And that is the sort of instinctive barrier which people put up. Whereas if you get the technology correct and you go through things in the right way, then they should embrace it because they'll have better data. They'll spend less time on administrative tasks and more time on value creating tasks. And here is often a key point, right? Is that you have to take the people in your procurement team on the journey so that they don't feel intimidated by the greater expectations on them to create value instead of performing administration. Right.
Okay, now
that's a key point.
Okay, I want to put this aside as I go to Colin, but first a couple of things. Paul mentions Ellen articulates a great point. Spend analytics takes longer, hence it starts there. Andrew comes back and says, is ordering and invoicing really part of procurement practice? It is usually finance owned. So Colin, I'm going to use this slide, which was also from yourself. They gave an overview of your approach. When you hear what both Andrew say and Paul say, I mean, how can we address that with regards to this particular graph here?
Okay, so I mean, to give you the kind of meaning behind this graph overall, this was how I approached the brief that was given to me. You know, Colin, please give me a system strategy or whatever. I mean, taking very, very sort of common sense steps. I know Alan referred to a gap analysis earlier. I kind of did a gap analysis myself on our procurement footprint. What was it that we actually had, and in what areas did we not have technology? So I think one of my first lessons was I didn't realize just how many diverse activities within procurement there are for which there are actually dedicated types of technology. So as a novice, I was aware of ordering and invoicing. I'd never heard of spend analytics or category management or indeed ERFX. I didn't know technologies existed for them. So if you take a look at the kind of that cycle that I created there, in learning these and the relationship between them, I put this together and I could see that we had technology in the areas which are marked in orange. Okay, for example, we had Oracle in our P2P system. But that left us with massive areas where there was no technology at all, apart from email, Excel, and Microsoft Word. Part of that then was, okay, I now know what we don't have, and there's quite a lot. My next question then was, where do I start? And for me, I had a few sort of criteria to help me make that decision. The one I've already mentioned more than once here is that pick an area where the process is already mature. And on that basis, for example, we had good data in our P2P system, so we could look at spend analytics. Furthermore, I also looked into the whole deal sheet area, which was our contract pre-approval, because we had a very strong contract pre-approval process. So that was one criterion I used. Another criterion I have to say, and it's never far away, is money. An ROI, as Alan had referred to there. We did use a SaaS solution for spend analytics, extremely economical and good value for money, and very, very lightweight and easy to get up and running in an agile way. So again, that was another tick in favor of spend analytics. And in fact, that was the thing that we started with first. I think another thing, then, just getting back to the question about barriers for customers and so on, I mean, customer centricity is very, very important here. So in picking this, and again, I was kind of new to the area, we could introduce spend analytics with minimum disruption to our customers and stakeholders. They didn't even know we had it. This was something that we were able to do ourselves internally by just downloading data from our ERP system. So there was no change or disruption to their life. All they got at the end of the process was some nice looking reports telling them what they were spending and where, and that looked very, very impressive. On the other hand, we're in the middle of a very big implementation right now in this contract pre-approval area, and I took my time getting around to that because of cost and because, I am very, very careful about the impact I have on customers. I'm introducing it in phases so that their experience, of it is of a very, very smooth transition.
All right, now I have to go to this as we look at this to Alan. And Paul writes, what would the panel comment about tail spend projects? Leave until after transformation, include in the core transformation project, start there first. Within the context of the question and what you just heard from Andre and Colin, Alan, I mean, how do you view it as now coming from practitioner side, now providing a solution? A very good solution, obviously. How do you incorporate that in? Do you assess the client landscape and look for these kinds of frameworks for success? In what way do you help guide the client in that regard?
Yeah, you referred to just in general or specifically with respect to tail spend?
Well, actually, in general, and then drill down to tail spend a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my view, I mean, if you look at the previous webinar around large implementations not driving the success that people want, I would say to clients and prospective clients, look at where you can get some wins. As I mentioned before, a lot of the clients start with wins around supplier compliance or around savings through e-auctions. And then clients at a second phase, they kind of focus on some other areas such as category strategy plans, general e-sourcing, for example, more fuller onboarding, and also focus on the tail spend. And the challenge with tail spend is really around, it happens outside of procurement, and it's very hard to get data on that. And I think one of the first steps to understand tail spend is to put processes in place or systems in place. For example, we developed a quick quote application, so users outside of procurement can use a system, and then procurement can have some governance around that system in terms of what suppliers are used, how it's done, and then gather the data to understand how to refine the process and move forward. So I think, my advice would be really starting with areas where you find success, and Colin, for example, has started with those kind of areas, and then build upon them. Once procurement within an organisation needs better PR, and I think by gaining with areas where you can get an ROI, it's a bit of a PR exercise to be able to roll out more systems and processes, which will let the organisation improve and gain a competitive advantage over everyone else.
So it's really a collaborative environment that's strategic. I've almost kind of, and to sum up, and then we'll go to the final section. Jim Collins is good to great, talks about the flywheel concept of initiatives that gain traction, that grow momentum, that get buy-in, that continue to grow and expand on those areas. So based upon that, you know, the areas that seem to be the top three. And by the way, I hope, Paul, that Ellen just answered your question. Let us know if you need any further clarification. But it would seem that spend analytics and then RFX and going into those areas would be the second and the third, ordering and invoicing, which are all areas that a SaaS solution can certainly provide that traction that's needed. Just one side note, and I'll just ask you this question, just to you, Colin. Do you think procurement will ever stop using Excel spreadsheets?
I don't think so. For all of our improvements at the moment, we still find areas where, you know, there is some little niche thing that we do not have dedicated technology for yet, and you cannot beat them for agility. So even as we roll out something right now in the whole area of contract approval, we notice there are certain little workarounds thereafter we will need, and before we can find the dedicated technology for it, yes, even then we will indeed go back to Excel.
Kind of like trying to reinvent the pencil. No matter how automated we get, we still need pencils. So let's look at change and the next poll. And Toby, I want to cue you on this one. When implementing an eProcurement solution, which one of the following is necessary for success? Is it going to be a phased, modular, controlled approach, a parallel evolution of the technology and process, or minimize disruption of technology for stakeholders or others? So I'm going to open up that poll right now to everyone. This is our third and final poll. And, you know, I'm going to start with you, Andre, because you talked about change management and all of those elements. Looking at this within the context of your expertise with change, what do you expect to see?
Yeah, right. First of all, though, if you permit me, I'm just going to cycle quickly back to tail spend because I think it's a really interesting point. Now, yes, to answer the question from my point of view is that a top performing procurement operation, modern procurement operation, has 100% of spend under management. So you cannot build a strategy which does not take account of tail spend. Okay, so you make sure that you have a solution to capture and manage in the most effective way, which may be hands-off, may be enabling your business people to buy directly with some to bid and buy technology of their own, with some lightweight technology, but have a strategy which encompasses 100% every single dollar that a company, I always used to say every single dollar or euro that a company spends or pound is worth the same. So it's the same if it's a dollar as part of a major spend, and it's the same, has the same value if it's down in tail spend. So make sure you manage everything. And if you get it right, you can capture all spend. That was the first thing. The other thing I'd like to then cycle in on is I'd like to pick up on what Colin said. He used the word agile and agility. Okay, so I think when you come to implementing any business system solution right now, okay, previously maybe you were looking at efficient, effective systems, but now you're looking at strategic agility. Right. The major strategic objective is that whatever you implement today, you can implement something different tomorrow. Right. So it's all about
agility is the key. Hello. Oh, I think I lost someone there. Colin, are you still with us?
I'm still here indeed, John, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so let me ask you this, based upon what Andre just mentioned, and Ellen, I can get into with you right afterwards. The responses so far are 60% phased or modular controlled approach, 38% parallel approach. Does that surprise you? Does that, our organizations, the agility, does that minimize the impact of change? Like with Patty, when you looked at implementing, let's say, the Market Dojo solution, how much change was involved and how important was agility? And the phased obviously seems to be important on that. What roles did that play?
Sure. And we have a slide later on which kind of lays out some of the features of the approach that I would have taken. And it's interesting, I would have put in a fourth approach here, which was all of the above. All of these things were critical to me in deciding what to automate and when. In terms of agility, it happens to be one of the 5 key corporate values in Paddy Power Betfair. And, necessity is the mother of invention. I didn't have a lot of money to start with. I didn't have a blank check and so on. So solutions such as, honestly, the Market Dojo offering, where, I dealt with some suppliers who told me, well, Colin, you have to buy a block of 10 licenses, etc. And each one is quite expensive. And here's me dipping my toe in the water, trying to see if this will work for us. Buying 10 licenses for 3 years does not work. On the other hand, dealing with Market Dojo, I was allowed to buy one. For example, in the area of category management or RFX and so on. And as we sort of experiment with this and trial it, that's currently our phase, if you like, and pilot it. When that, if you like, we see that's successful and it helps go back and refine or reshape our process, okay, at that point then I'm happy to invest further.
Well, now let me know, and Toby, if you could share the results with everyone. I'm going to go to Alan now, because you mentioned an interesting thing about a big budget or a blank check. Alan, before I ask you to add comments onto what Colin has said and Andre said, one of the interesting things is earlier this year participated in a research project, and it came back. They said that some of the big companies, the biggest hindrance that they have to successful adoption is an unlimited budget. And Alan, I guess what they were saying is that ultimately, if you have an unlimited budget, you tend to take an overarching approach. You're trying to do everything all at once. With Paddy and working with you and working on a SaaS model, I mean, do you think that's one of the advantages in terms of not only cost, but obviously ease of implementation and the minimization of having to go through a major change? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, in terms of unlimited budget, I think the trouble with large ERP implementations is that when you get towards the end, the unlimited budget suddenly becomes very limiting, and so you never get to the end. I mean, I actually really like what Colin said then. It's a mixture of the above. I think it's a mixture of the two. So it's like you can kind of start the process of thinking about everything at once, but in terms of implementation, it's a kind of a phased approach which gradually ramps up in different areas when you start getting success in various things. I mean, if you look at spend analytics, to get the spend analytics, you need the data first. So you could think about the spend analytics, but you need to start implementing things to give the data before you can actually really enable that project. And with things like e-sourcing, for example, you could start it to begin with one user and then ramp it up. So you might start at the beginning, but the endpoint is much further down the line. So it's actually really quite interesting between the thinking about and the implementation and the ramping up of the implementation, which SaaS technologies now allow you to get to the end result. So if you're going to draw out the phases between planning and implementation and ramping up of the technologies, it'd be a very interesting type of Gantt chart, should we say.
All right, now to go with the, okay, and Andre, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I hope you're there. Andre, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You mentioned agility, and I want to build on that, but another area is disruptive process change. Is that part of the success of SaaS solutions, where what ultimately happens is that with the ERP approach, you had a lot of disruption going on potentially? Is the agility and the fact that you're not necessarily going to disrupt, but be, I'll use the term surgical in the implementation, and you don't have a big budget to justify, are those all factors that help to alleviate that transformation or that process change?
They are, but I would say large ERP implementations actually don't disrupt enough. Don't think of disruption as a negative word. Disruptive process change is needed. It's absolutely necessary. Embrace it. It's why we do things. It's what every company has to start thinking that they have to do. But obviously, you have to be surgical and you have to manage the disruptive change which you create in a company in the right way. right? You don't want to create unwanted disruption, right? You want to create wanted disruption. You need to embrace it and manage it. Now, if you have the right tools to do that, tools like the one we're developing, then that is exactly what you want to do. If you don't disrupt and change the way people go about doing things, you will not survive.
Okay, now wait, hold that there for a second, because what you say makes a lot of sense. But let's break it down for the audience as to a practical understanding. And I believe Colm, this is the slide to which you were referring. Being able to do that, it came down to what we did do and what we did not do. Would you care to elaborate on this a little bit more, Colm?
Sure, indeed. So, I mean, what we did do, the word that's missing there from it, and I should have put it in at the time, is simply the word agile. But we do talk a lot in our team about taking baby steps, because we were starting from such an immature, if you like, opening point, but very much crawl, walk, run. We did indeed apply phased and modular, sort of a controlled approach to it. So not buying big on day one and having waste and unused modules and so on and so forth, or biting off more than we could use or chew. We were very, very careful to buy selectively. So if you remember the screen you showed earlier where I had the procurement cycle, there were certain activities that I picked on, that I cherry-picked because they offered me the best ROI, because there was the greatest need, the most urgent need, or because our process was already, the most mature there. And I take this point about the minimization of disruption of technology. I mean, where I'm going with this is certain things do change indeed and have to, but I think it's back to Andre's point again, it's how that happens. And it ties in with the next point that's there. We use technology to improve the service to our stakeholders and procurement's brand. We're very, very conscious that when we have front or customer-facing processes and technologies like purchase requisitions, POs, and these contract pre-approvals, that we bring our stakeholder and customer group with us. Paddy Power years ago, when they first tried to roll out PO, had great difficulty with this and had to have a second attempt at it. And I'm very, very careful not to let that happen here. So as I said earlier, I'm in the middle of rolling something out to several hundred users, but I'm taking the phased, modular, controlled approach. So starting with a pilot and so on. So while people's lives will change, I want that to be in a way that's very well signposted to them. And I very, very much want to hold their hand along the journey. And the other thing is, I also want them to feel like they've been consulted. Like in our pilot that we're going through at the moment, they are actually giving me feedback that I'm bringing back in, and in certain cases I'm able to redesign process. So they actually feel that they've been listened to. They're not stopping the overall project, it will happen, but they will be able to see their own fingerprints within the final solution that actually, if you like, is rolled out.
All right, so now let's bring this, because we've got about 3 minutes left, and time flies when you're having good conversation. And Ellen, I want to go back to you, and then I'll go to Andre, and we'll finish up with Colm, which I think it's a great idea, Colm, because let's face it, you're talking to those in the audience who are walking in your shoes or in the process of doing it. When you look at what you just heard, Ellen, from agility, process, what not to do, what to do, etc. I mean, and this may be a skewed question, but I think it has to be asked. When somebody is looking to integrate or involve or work with somebody like a Market Dojo or a SaaS provider, but let's look at Market Dojo, obviously, but what are some of the things that they should look for relative to what we've just heard today from Colm and Andre in terms of that relationship? What should they expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, procurement's going through a big PR exercise within organizations. It's never as high up as we all would like it to be. And, taking these baby steps is what we've seen, not just with Colm, but with all our very successful clients. They start small, prove the ROI, and grow within the organization. I'll say that I'm always amazed, though, that it's still growing within the organization is still never as easy as you want it to be, and it's continued challenges to grow, but that is the approach which we've seen drive real success within procurement, and also gets procurement in a higher visibility within the organization.
All right, so let's sum it up here, and on that sort of hopefully ties it all together. Andre, in about 30 seconds, because we have about 2 minutes left, in about 30 seconds, what would you list as being, and again, overly simplistic, the top 2 or 3 things somebody, an organization, procurement should do to have a successful implementation that they can build on?
Embrace change. Start with thinking how you can do things differently and follow that through. Whatever you do, consider whatever you change to today, you're going to have to change to something again different tomorrow. Agility and change cycles agility has to be there. Change cycles are short now. Build an organization and build a culture and take on tools and processes and technology architectures which permit you to keep changing. Don't think what you're doing today is the end of the road. It's not. All roads may lead to, but they keep leading to as well.
Okay, so agility, and that ties nicely with agility. Colm, final last words for I guess the 3 things that I just posed there. You know, what would be the most important elements, and maybe end it off with what's important in terms of choosing the right kind of SaaS provider partner.
Sure. Again, like, be very, very selective of what you buy. Establish the criteria that you will use. For me, it's urgency, the greatest area of need. What ROI do they offer? What allows you to buy in an agile way? And thereafter, make sure that you bring your customers with you.
All right. All right. Gentlemen, Alan, Colm, and of course, Andre, thank you so much for your time. I think these are very important on-the-ground practical conversations. I'm sure you and the audience will agree that the information, in fact, just to share, one person who's attending said they hope that everyone's been taking notes in terms of this. You don't have to worry about notes. This entire system, although you could take them, this entire webinar is recorded, will be made available on demand. There will also be a knowledge note that will come out within the next couple of weeks, which will provide a wonderful synopsis of what we've talked about today, and certainly provide the initial building blocks towards a successful implementation. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much, and of course, thank you in the audience for tuning in today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all.